In a rich man's house there is no place to spit but his face. Diogenes of Sinope, one of the most colorful and controversial philosophers of ancient Greece, was a central figure in the development of Cynicism. Born in Sinope, a city on the southern coast of the Black Sea, Diogenes lived from about 412 or 404 BCE to 323 BCE. His life and philosophy were characterized by a relentless pursuit of truth and a disdain for social conventions and material wealth. A controversial philosopher who never minced his words and said it exactly like he thought. Diogenes was born into a relatively prosperous family. His father, Hycesius, was a banker, but the family fell into disrepute when they were involved in a scandal of defacing the local currency. This incident led to their exile from Sinope, a formative event that would shape Diogenes' future philosophy. Fleeing to Athens, Diogenes embarked on a quest for a new kind of currency, one of virtue and wisdom. He quickly became a disciple of Antisthenes, a student of Socrates and the founder of Cynicism. Antisthenes preached a life of virtue in accordance with nature, free from the corrupting influences of society. Diogenes embraced these teachings wholeheartedly, but he took them to radical extremes that shocked even his mentor. Certainly. Here's an expanded passage illustrating how Diogenes took Antisthenes' teachings to radical extremes. Antisthenes preached a life of virtue in accordance with nature, free from the corrupting influences of society. He advocated for simplicity, self-discipline, and the rejection of unnecessary luxuries. For Antisthenes, living a virtuous life meant adhering to natural law and finding contentment within oneself, independent of external wealth and societal approval. His teachings were a call to embrace a lifestyle of moderation and moral integrity. Diogenes embraced these teachings wholeheartedly, but he took them to radical extremes that shocked even his mentor. While Antisthenes might advocate for modest living and the rejection of excess, Diogenes interpreted these principles with uncompromising rigor and dramatic flair. For example, Antisthenes might suggest that one should not rely on material possessions for happiness, but Diogenes took this to the extreme by discarding almost all personal belongings. One famous anecdote recounts how Diogenes, upon seeing a child drinking water from his cupped hands, threw away his own cup, exclaiming, "A child has beaten me in plainness of living." This act symbolized his commitment to radical simplicity and his belief that true virtue required stripping away all superfluities. Diogenes' disregard for social norms went far beyond what Antisthenes would have condoned. While Antisthenes taught the value of independence from societal judgments, Diogenes openly flouted social conventions to the point of scandal. He would perform what were considered indecent acts in public, such as urinating or defecating in the street, to demonstrate his belief that societal norms were artificial and unnecessary constraints on human behavior. These acts were not just for shock value. They were intended to provoke people to question the arbitrary rules that governed their lives. One particularly radical example occurred during a banquet when Diogenes began to eat loudly and sloppily, drawing disapproving looks from the other guests. When confronted, he retorted, "It is better to eat in public than to be hungry in private." This behavior exemplified his extreme commitment to living in accordance with nature, utterly free from the fear of social censure. Diogenes' lifestyle, marked by his residence in a large ceramic jar instead of a conventional home, and his habit of carrying a lantern in daylight while claiming to search for an honest man, further illustrated his radical interpretation of Cynic philosophy. These acts were daily demonstrations of his belief that true freedom and happiness came from living in virtue and simplicity, unbound by societal expectations. In these ways, Diogenes not only embraced Antisthenes' teachings, but amplified them to an extent that was provocative and often shocking, even to those who shared his philosophical ideals. His extreme actions served as a constant challenge to those around him to rethink their values and the foundations of their society. Diogenes' lifestyle in Athens was a vivid manifestation of his philosophical beliefs. He chose to live in abject poverty. He owned nothing but a cloak, a stick, and a small pouch. One of the most famous stories about Diogenes involves his encounter with Alexander the Great. According to legend, Alexander, intrigued by Diogenes' reputation, sought him out. When he found Diogenes sunbathing in the marketplace, Alexander stood over him and said, "I am Alexander the Great." Diogenes responded, "And I am Diogenes the Cynic." Amused, Alexander offered to grant Diogenes any wish he desired. Diogenes replied, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." This bold and disdainful reply impressed Alexander, who allegedly remarked, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." This anecdote encapsulates Diogenes' indifference to power and wealth. emphasizing his belief that true happiness and freedom come from living a virtuous life in harmony with nature, unbound by societal expectations. Diogenes' philosophy was characterized by its asceticism, disdain for material wealth, and a relentless pursuit of virtue. He believed that humans had complicated their lives with unnecessary desires and conventions. His goal was to simplify life and return to a state of self-sufficiency. Diogenes held that virtue was the only good, and that it was attained through living in accordance with nature. He rejected the artificial constructs of society, arguing that they distracted from the pursuit of true happiness. He famously said, "Humans have complicated every simple gift of the gods." Diogenes' contempt for social conventions was legendary. He believed that many social norms were arbitrary and stifling. He would perform what were considered inappropriate acts in public to show his disdain for societal hypocrisy. For example, he would eat in the marketplace, which was considered improper, and when criticized, he would retort, "It is better to do so where all can see me than to be seen eating in secret." Diogenes also challenged the institution of marriage and the concept of family. He argued that conventional familial ties were unnecessary, and that love and loyalty should extend beyond these arbitrary boundaries. His behavior was a living critique of the status quo, intended to provoke people to question their assumptions and live more authentically. Diogenes had a complex relationship with the political authorities of his time. He saw most politicians as corrupt and self-serving. His interactions with figures of power, like his encounter with Alexander the Great, were marked by his characteristic frankness and irreverence. He often likened politicians to dogs, not just because of their behavior, but to emphasize that true leaders should possess the loyalty and guardianship qualities of a good watchdog. He famously said, "I'm looking for an honest man, not just in the sense of personal integrity, but also in terms of public service." Diogenes continued his philosophical practice throughout his life, moving from Athens to Corinth. Even in his old age, he remained a provocateur and a teacher. He would gather crowds in the agora, challenging their beliefs and urging them to live more authentic lives. Diogenes died in Corinth at the age of approximately 90. There are varying accounts of his death, one of which suggests he died from holding his breath, while another claims he succumbed to an illness brought on by eating raw octopus. Regardless of the specifics, his death, much like his life, became the subject of numerous stories and legends. Diogenes' influence on philosophy and culture extended far beyond his lifetime. He is often regarded as one of the founders of Cynicism, a school of thought that emphasized living in virtue in agreement with nature, and was later influential in the development of Stoicism. His teachings and way of life inspired countless individuals to question societal norms and to seek a life of greater authenticity and virtue. Diogenes of Sinope remains a towering figure in the history of Western philosophy. His life was a testament to the belief that happiness and freedom come not from wealth, power, or social status, but from living a virtuous life in accordance with nature. His disdain for materialism, social conventions, and political corruption continues to resonate, challenging each new generation to consider what it truly means to live well. Diogenes' legacy endures as a powerful reminder of the importance of integrity, simplicity, and the relentless pursuit of truth. His life story is not just a historical account, but a call to examine our own lives and the values we hold dear. I hope you enjoyed this brief history on Diogenes of Sinope. Please leave us a comment, and don't forget to subscribe and share this video.